if you were sent to a war zone and didn't have any training, how would you behave? Leaked viral footage from the Ukraine conflict shows some Russian soldiers, probably recently mobilized, engaging in some pretty risky tactical behavior, and they pay a price for it. We're going to be checking out the footage right now, and I'm going to break down just the difference between these and real professional soldiers. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is drone footage coming to us from, I think it's the 37th Military Brigade, who put this out around the new year, around late December, early January. What you guys can see here, I suspect that this may be near Bakhmut. At that time, there were a number of attacks like this, but let's take a look. You can see that this looks like an industrial area. My guess would be that there were a number of industrial areas in the eastern part of Bakhmut that Russia was trying to take. Now, you guys can see here, there is what looks like what we would call a fire team. I think based on the current status of Russian forces, they would probably call this an entire squad. But as you guys can see, they look like they're carrying mattresses or blankets. Now, when we talk about the need to move tactically, we mean a couple of things. First off is what sometimes is called, we sometimes call it noise and light discipline, but also using camouflage, cover, and concealment. And in this case, you guys can clearly see that while sometimes you go, how much of a difference does camouflage really make? You look at these guys carrying these, what are probably mattresses or blankets, and you can see just how apparent it becomes that they are just calling literally to anything in the sky to come and that they can be seen. The other thing that I want to point out is what they're failing to do is called dispersion. Dispersion is this idea that you spread out your forces in such a way that they are that there's no center of gravity, so to speak. There's no one place where you could drop ammunition and inflict maximum casualties. As you guys can see, an artillery round, a lucky artillery round hitting just about anywhere in this area is going to take out those 3 soldiers. Only this lollygagger in the back is going to be relative or have the greater chance of being unscathed. Okay. The other thing that's worth noting is that there's no one on security. All of these guys are carrying these big bags, these big mattresses with both hands, which means that if they were to be engaged in by direct fire, they would have to drop them, pick up their weapon, and return fire. In combat, seconds do make a difference, and the fact that you don't have your weapon readily accessible is a huge problem. It's not even clear that these guys are carrying their weapons. I hope they're slung, but if they're doing everything else wrong, well, I can't really say that I'd be certain that they have their weapons at all. As you can see, they are making their way towards a building which has recently been hit with artillery. This is the other crazy thing. You can see it's smoking, which indicates that at least in the last couple hours, it's taken some kind of strike, some kind of hit. And yet they are casually just heading into this compromised building. I also want to point out that this is not a very safe building to be in. Now, don't get me wrong. Cover is cover, concealment's concealment. But when you have a big concrete building like this that's actively burning and also has significant structural damage, it can be a dangerous place to choose to set up. And normally I would say, hey, you got to do what you got to do, right? But why you would choose this actively like this is like trying to camp out in a forest fire. It's really, you should really reevaluate if this is really the spot you want to be in. If you wouldn't be better off in a smaller outbuilding like this that remains intact, this building right here. You could also use some of these trailers as potential spots where you could set up your betting. As you can see, they are running. Okay, it's not even clear that this is where, they're not going to this burning building. Instead, they are going to this building here, another destroyed building. But you guys can see, they are just trying to run. Their strategy is just to run as fast as possible into this area. They understand. They're running this fast. They understand that they're in imminent danger of being hit with artillery. And yet somehow they've still been ordered to go get this bedding. This is the sort of thing if we listen to some of the leaked phone calls and reports coming out of the front, this is how recently mobilized soldiers are generally treated. They are so poorly trained and so poorly equipped that to Russian commanders, they are barely worth trying to protect. And this isn't me saying it. This is many of their own soldiers saying these things. And so what you end up with is menial high-risk tasks it's just assumed, right? They are just forced to or ordered to go get blankets in the middle of an artillery attack. This is preposterous. This is a complete waste of life. This is a complete waste of manpower. But this is what happens when you produce troops which have no training, which have no skills that they can contribute to the battlefield. And when you have that situation, it's almost not worth it to treat them like regular soldiers. Instead, to assign them as just human robots, human drones sent on menial, silly tasks at incredibly high risk. Now, you may be thinking, Paul, wouldn't it make more sense for you to take these new troops and, as best you can, train them on the battlefield? Obviously, it's the most brutal teacher, but it can also be the fastest teacher. And to that, I would say, yeah, that's what a military with more robust leadership would do. They would perhaps assign each junior mobilized soldier an experienced combat soldier to help learn the ropes, to give them an understanding of how to survive in combat, and then eventually how to actually perform well. And frankly, even after a couple of weeks, you could turn these basically civilians given uniforms into combat troops that are somewhat effective. And I suspect in some cases that may be what's happening. But as we've talked about, the Russian military has a bunch of problems. It does lack leadership at the non-commissioned officer level, at the officer level. It also has really deeply rooted sectarian problems. Think of it a little bit like the Army of the United States post-Vietnam. There was so much racial tension within the U.S. at that time that many units were unable to function due to the fact that white soldiers and black soldiers and Hispanic soldiers would simply be unwilling to work together. Russia right now is experiencing a similar problem where Chechen soldiers, for example, will just blatantly discriminate against other soldiers, or Western Russian soldiers will be given preferential treatment to, say, indigenous or Yakutsk soldiers. And this sort of, when you have this environment, when you feel like people aren't part of your in-group, then you are less willing to invest in them, and you also are more likely to dehumanize them and send them on absolutely preposterous missions like this. So if I were a betting man, I would bet and say that the leadership or the primary demographic of the unit that they've been assigned to is from one region, of one specific ethnic region, and that these soldiers are from another ethnic region. And you guys can see there is that lucky hit we've talked about. They know that's why they took off running. They could hear the incoming rounds. They thought they could get to this destroyed building, this even more destroyed building, before they got hit, and they were just not able to. And that, guys, it's just going to run again. This is one of the problems with the Russian military. Here's the thing. It is a way to succeed is to have large, vast waves of cannon fodder with terrible equipment. I'm going to even, there was a viral video recently. I can try to find it for you guys. And it was of Russian military body armor. This is reportedly a Russian issued ZHZL-74 armored vest. And this is an example of what is being issued to Russian troops as body armor. Now, these are thin aluminum rivets. And I want to point out, this probably won't stop anything other than a stab vest. Now, there is actual body armor called Dragon Scale that was found to be relatively effective. Not as effective as just straight single unit SAPI plates, but instead of thin pieces of aluminum, the Dragon Scale armor were ceramic tiles capable of absorbing and dispersing the kinetic energy of a military grade round. And you can see that just how thin this stuff did behave, exactly like you would expect armor pieces of aluminum to behave. These are stab vests that are mostly probably issued to Russian forces that don't really confer any ballistic protection. And I just think this is important because, again, when you look at Ukrainian forces, almost to a man, they have ceramic body armor, ceramic plates. There's a belief that Ukraine and Russia are roughly at parity for casualty numbers, and I think that's probably true. But I think that if you peeled the data back, you would see that the rate at which Ukrainian forces return to the battlefield, i.e. who have less grievous wounds and are less likely to become KIA as a result of those wounds, is way higher. And that's probably solely due to good quality medical equipment and proper body armor. I can't imagine, at that point, you should just not give your troops armor at all so that they have a realistic understanding of how protected they are from things like artillery and direct fire. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Of course, if you want the uncensored combat video breakdowns, those are all on the Patreon. This week, we are going to be covering all the leaked footage from Soledar, and it's going to be wild. New video drops every Friday, so be sure to subscribe. It supports the channel. Link is in the description. Thanks to my Lieutenant tier patrons. I'll see you guys in the next one.